let's get into our chat about the World Championship. As I mentioned, the draw for the PDC World Championship was made a little over an hour ago when we're recording this, and we'll just give our immediate reaction to it. We know the draw for the first round and the potential second round as well. Talk to me about what most caught your eye from the draw earlier tonight.
Yeah, and of course, we'll talk more about this in future episodes as we get closer to the World Championships. So I'll just focus on the first and potential second round ties that drew my eye. And I won't mention all 32 because I'll leave at least one or two for you to discuss. But there's obviously, as we knew there would be, some very tasty ties. And there's barely a seed who I don't think, or I wouldn't be that surprised if they did go out. Obviously, I'm not going to expect that all 32 unseeded players will beat all 32 seeded players in the second round. But there's very few that I think it would be that big of a surprise if they were to pull the upset. And that's because of just how good, pretty much, and not just good, but how well all of the Pro Tour, almost all of the Pro Tour qualifiers and many of the international qualifiers have been playing recently. If they come and play their game, they'll have every chance to win. Of those, though, I'll start with the first round ties that I'm most looking forward to. One, I think we have to say, and Willie O'Connor against Bo Greaves. Obviously, Bo Greaves undefeated in the women's series this year, nearly undefeated in all competition. This will be the first time we see her play against men in the PDC, and she drew a very tricky first round tie. Willie O'Connor, the first half of the year was struggling. Probably the first time in a few years that he really was struggling. But in the end, he started to look like the Willie O'Connor that's nearly a top 32 player and has been nearly a top 32 player for a few years. He finished as the 10th qualifier, despite for some time looking like he could miss out on the World Championships, because Willie O'Connor really is a very good player. But so is Bo Greaves. And that is, I think, a matchup that, they both could average well north of 100, and it really wouldn't be that surprising. They both could then beat Gabriel Clemens. But Gabriel Clemens has also been playing fairly well the last few months. That is a tricky trio of players. If I'm Gabriel Clemens, I'm not happy with that draw. If I'm Willie O'Connor, I'm not happy with that draw. If I'm Bo Greaves, I'm not happy with that draw, because they each got a very difficult player to go against, and it's going to be whoever comes through of those three will be a very deserving player to reach the third round. A couple other first round ties that are interesting. At the other end, Niels Zonneveld against Louis Williams. That is a very, very important match for tour card purposes. Niels Zonneveld right now is just outside the tour card spots. Louis Williams is barely inside it. Louis Williams is currently 60th in the post-World Championship order of merit, but I don't think he's safe. I think a win would, in essence, put him safe. But I don't think he's safe, because all Adam Gavlas needs is a win. All Jeff Smith needs is a win. All Keegan Brown needs is a win. And then suddenly Louis Williams is 63rd. Niels Zonneveld would need 2. So would Jim Williams and a couple other people. But it's not that unfathomable to see a couple of those players get 2, and suddenly Louis Williams is 65th or 66th. Niels Zonneveld, a win might not be enough, but a win is at the very minimum necessary for him. That's a very key match, because at least one of those players probably will not be on tour next year, possibly both, depending on results. And that makes it a match to watch. Just a couple other first round ties, though, that I'm looking forward to. Matt Campbell, Danny Baggish. Baggish was playing very well at the end of the year. It took him 21 months to find his feet, or 20 months to find his feet as a tour card holder, but he was getting results pretty much every Players' Championship over the last couple months. He's looking a good player, and the winner of that gets Mervyn King in what could be a very tasty second round tie. And one more first round match, Ryan Joyce, who just came through the PDPA qualifier, which we'll talk about in a second, going against Scott Williams, who's been, despite not having a tour card, one of the emergent players this year. That's a very tricky match, and the winner gets Rob Cross, and Rob Cross cannot be happy with that draw, because both of them can beat him, especially since Ryan Joyce is playing really well right now. Yes, he had to go to the PDPA qualifier, but he won through that. He was the first player out in the in the Pro Tour order of merit. He also won a couple matches at the Players' Championship final. He missed some Euro Tours that he qualified for. Otherwise, he would have been in the World Championships. He's a player that, even though he went to the PDPA qualifier, can't say it was all that bad of a year, even if it was a disappointing one for him. But that's a first round tie to look forward to. As far as some other seeds that have difficult potential matchups, obviously these players might not get through their first round match, but Daryl Gurney potentially going against Alan Suter, who has really come back into his own the last few months. We just talked about him on our last show, about his run to the quarterfinals at the Grand Slam, and had he been able to hit double 18, his favorite, probably we would have been saying run at least to the semifinals of the Grand Slam. Callan Ritz potentially going against Josh Rock, one of the matches where I think the seed will be not the favorite. Ritz has not had the same year as he had last year, but did just make a major quarterfinal at the Players' Championship Finals. And I mean, he absolutely can beat Josh Rock, but that is a very difficult tie. And I'll mention just one more. Gary Anderson potentially going against Matters Razma in the second round. If you remember 2 years ago, that was a second round matchup. Matters Razma got through his first round before going out to Gary Anderson in the second round. But Razma had chances. He had chances to win that match. Just missed too many set darts and ended up losing 3-1 in the end. But for much of that match, he looked the better player. Razma was a better player than he was 2 years ago. Gary Anderson, I'm not going to say he's a worse player than he was 2 years ago, but he hasn't been getting the results. And now looking set to drop out of the top 16 if he doesn't have a run here, potentially out of the top 20. That's a tricky tie. That said, Razma has been struggling recently, but what better way to get back on form than to avenge a defeat from 2 years ago? Razma's a very good player. If he can get back on form, he has every chance to upset the two-time world champion.
A lot of good ties in there, and I've got to say, if you hadn't have mentioned that Matt Campbell, Danny Baggish game, I would have been very surprised, because it is not often that we see two players from North America draw each other in the World Championship, and we've got quite a few North Americans in the draw, one extra after Jeff Smith won through the PDPA qualifier, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. But just, I guess, going from the top to the bottom of the draw, looking through the ties that really stood out for me in the first round, and the Willie O'Connor Bo Greaves game is definitely one that's jumped off the page. Just before that, we had Adam Gavlas and another player that came through that last chance qualifier, Richie Bennett as well. That's one that's caught the eye for me. I guess one of the youngest players against one of the oldest players in the draw, and we're going to get that as well with Steve Beaton continuing his record run of World Championship appearances, going up against Danny Van Tripe, who is one of the players who doesn't have a tour card at the moment, but looking pretty good at the moment to get one after Scott Williams had a few wins at the weekend in the Players' Championship finals, but not 100% guaranteed at the moment. Other ties that have caught the eye for me, and one that I've got to mention, is Roby John Rodriguez against Lawrence Ilagan. We know Roby's ties with the Philippines, and Roby's been one of the standout players from the players outside the top 32 players that have got a new tour card for this year. So that's a tie I'm looking forward to. And another one as well I'll give a mention to, and it is Karol Sedlacek, a player that's looking to get their tour card, maybe outright getting the top 64 by the end of the year. I think he's probably going to need 2 wins minimum to get in there, and he's going up against one of the hardest international qualifiers in Raymond Smith, and the winner of that goes up against Dirk van Duijvenbode. So that's a little section of the draw that is going to be very tough for either player there. And just looking at potential second round ties, and we should give a mention to a few of the big boys, if you like. Going Price, the top seed, will play either Luke Woodhouse or the Ukrainian qualifier, first player from Ukraine to qualify for the World Championship, Vladislav Omolchenko, if I've said that correctly. Michael Smith, the Grand Slam champion, he'll play either Jermaine Wattamina or Nathan Rafferty. Peter Wright, the defending champion, he'll play either Mickey Mansell or Ben Robb. And then the last of the big four, if you like, you mentioned, they're going to play each other, Niels Zonneveld and Louis Williams, for the right to play Michael Van Gerwen. And a few other potential second round ties I'll give a mention to. Dave Chisnell, we could see him go up against Andrew Gilden. That would be a repeat of a Euro Tour final this year. We could have Kim Huybrechts against Keane Barry. I mentioned the Roby John Rodriguez game. The winner of that will play Dimitri Vandenberg. You mentioned the Josh Rock Callum Ridds game, and we think back to last year's World Championship, Callum Ridds having that incredible run, getting to the quarterfinals and pushing the eventual champion Peter Wright all the way to a ninth set. Of course, he did have one of the best sleeves in the game back then. He was wearing the Weekly Darts Cast logo, but you'd say probably going to go up against Josh Rock in that second round game. That is a very tough game. And you mentioned the Scott Williams game there as well. And Scott and Rob, of course, have become very good friends on the tour this year. So if Scott gets through that one, those two going up against each other is going to be one to watch as well.